So this morning, good morning, I would like to talk to you about faith, but I would like to come at it from the perspective of a percentage. So if you're one of those who likes the title, what is our faith percentage? But before we get started, I heard a story this week, and I'd like to give it to y'all. It really made me think about something, and I hope it does the same for y'all. The story goes, there's a man standing at the end of a beautiful fence. White picket fence, beautiful. On one side stands Christ, and on the other side stands Satan. And the man standing there saying, you know, Jesus, I really love what you're offering and stuff, but this side looks more fun. So his final decision is that he would sit on the fence with one leg on each side. And as he made the decision, he sat up on the fence, and all of a sudden, black. Everything went black. And when the picture regained itself, Satan was standing in front of him. And he said, wait. I had one foot over here with Jesus. And Satan looks at him and says, you idiot, I own the fence. Something to think about if we're sitting on the fence. So back to our faith. I'm going to start off where I like to start off when I'm talking about faith. Anybody want to guess? Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, verse 1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Why would we want to hope for something if we had it standing in front of us? Because we had it standing in front of us, we wouldn't hope for it. So that's important. So I'm going to look at it as if we're doing an Evel Knievel style jump across a big gorge, something. What happens if you don't make it 100% of the way? You crash. So I know what you're thinking. Jeff, you have just condemned us because none of us have 100% faith at all times. And that's true. But I'd like for you to pump your brakes for a minute, and we'll come back to this. And I'd like to bring it all together at the end, because I want to be a positive influence. I don't want to be what we would normally call a Debbie Downer. So just hold off till the end. It'll all make sense. So I'd like to look at a few examples of great faith and see what we can gain by their example. And we're going to start with a very young man named David. We'll start in 1 Samuel chapter 17. We'll start in verse 26, but we'll end up in verse 51. We will skip a little bit inside just for time purposes. But starting in verse 26 of 1 Samuel chapter 17. And David spoke to the men. This is where he's taking food to his brothers on the front line when they were battling the Philistines. So he was talking to the men that stood by him, saying, what shall be done to the man who kills this Philistine and takes away this shame from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him this way, saying, so shall it be done to the man who kills him. And his oldest brother Eliab heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, what have you come down? Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and your naughtiness of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. So they were thinking he was just coming down to see what was going on. But, as we know, his father sent him with a purpose. And David said, what have I done now? Was it not only a question? And he turned from him toward another and spoke according to this word. And the people answered him again in the same way. They told him what was going to happen. And the words which David spoke were heard, and they were told before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go fight with this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go up against this Philistine and fight with him. Are you crazy? For you are but a youth. You're a child. And he has been a man of war from his youth." So he's been in battle maybe longer than David's been alive. So let's skip down to verse 40. And he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones out of the brook for himself, and put them in the shepherd's vessel with which he had, even in a bag. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near the Philistine. And if you continue to read the story, David and Goliath go back and forth, hurling insults and telling each other that their dead bodies would be food for the birds. So we'll skip down to 48. We'll move all past that. And it came to pass, when the Philistine rose and went and drew near to meet David, David hurried and ran toward the ranks to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand into his bag and took a stone from there and slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell upon his face on the earth. And David was stronger with the sling and with the stone than the Philistine. And he struck the Philistine and killed him, but no sword was found in his hand. Then verse 51. And David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took out his sword, and drew it out of his sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. So what would you say in this area David's percentage of faith was? 100%. He had all faith in God. Why would he pick 5 stones if he knew he could kill him with one? Later on, we find out Goliath had 4 brothers. So let's look at another man whose faith was way up there. We'll start Genesis 22, verses 7 through 12. Of course, here we're talking about Abraham. Genesis 22, verses 7 through 12. And Isaac spoke to Abraham. They were on their way to the mountain. Isaac had no idea why they were going. Abraham was probably pondering a lot of things at this point. But Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." And he said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" And Abraham said, "My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering." So they both went on together. And they came to the place of which God had told him. And Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order. And he bound his son Isaac and laid him on the wood upon the altar. Now, I wasn't planning on this, but you can actually say here that Isaac's faith at this point was really high because he allowed this to happen. He could have fought and fought and fought, but it doesn't say he did. So, and Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called to him from the heavens and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." And he said, "Do not lay your hand upon the lad, nor do anything to him. For I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Did you notice something here? God didn't know what Abraham would choose until he was bringing the knife down at Isaac. Or however that worked. I always picture him starting down with the knife, and God could have just as easily been watching his shoulder muscles or something like that, or even reading his thoughts. You know, he's God. He could do it however he wanted to. So let's look at our last one, and it's a familiar story, but I want to take a different angle of it than the way that most people view it. Matthew chapter 14, we're going to start in verse 25. They're out on the sea. Christ isn't with them, and there's a big tempest. And they're scared because of the waves. Matthew 14, verse 25. Now in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled and said, "It is an apparition." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Then Peter answered and said to him, "Lord, if it is you, bid me to come to you upon the waters." And he said, "Come." And after climbing down from the ship, Peter walked upon the waters to go to Jesus. Now, most people here would continue reading to the point where Peter does end up losing his faith and falling into the water. But I want to look at something different. When Jesus asked, what was his response? Did you catch it? He didn't say, "Come, Peter." He simply said, "Come," which leads me to believe that the offer was to everybody on the boat. But Peter was the only one with the faith to step out at that time. You ever thought about that? That hit me one day really hard. So now I'd like to go to Hebrews chapter 10, verses 38 and 39. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 38 and 39. Now it is written, "The just shall live by faith. But if anyone draws back, my soul does not delight in him. But we are not of those who draw back unto destruction. Rather, we are of faith unto the saving of the soul." Soul here, in both of these verses, could also be translated as life. And in my translation, the "my" in verse 38 is capitalized, which tells me that that means it's God talking about his life, not delighting in our life. So, with that translation in mind, it could also be read, "Now it is written, the just shall live by faith. But if anyone draws back, my eternal life does not delight in him. But we are not of those who draw back unto destruction. Rather, we are of faith unto the saving of our eternal life." So in conclusion, like I said, I want to give y'all a positive to this. I'm going to try to get through this story without my voice cracking. But if it does, I'm sorry. So let's all sit back, close your eyes, and picture this. Sicily, 1908. Oh, sorry. Apparently I've watched too much Golden Girls. Only some of y'all will get that. So picture this, and I'm going to do this in the first person because that's the way I like it. I'm standing in a courtroom. God the Father is sitting in the chair as the judge. And there's a prosecutor over there going through my life, maybe minute by minute, my thoughts, telling the judge everything that I did wrong. And I can't do nothing but hang my head because I know he's right. We all know who that prosecutor is. He's the adversary. And you stand there for hours listening to him. I'm standing there listening to him go through my life, telling all the bad things that I've ever done. And just as he's about to finish, I look around. My guy's nowhere to be found. I'm looking around. I got nobody to advocate for me. I'm really scared because the frowny face up behind the judge's seat doesn't look so good for me. But then somebody walks through the gate, walks up to me, puts his hand on my shoulder. I look at him, and his face shines like the sun. And he says, "Don't worry, brother. I've got you." And he proceeds up to the desk. And he says, "Dad, I know he did all this. But he's the one that I died for. All of that was washed away. So, please, let him in." So, brethren, just remember, we are required to grow in our faith until the end of our lives, or the coming, whenever it may be. But after that, it's God's great grace that takes us from there and pushes us across the finish line into eternal life. And that's where our hope should always be. Godspeed that day.